RPG Adventures from Scratch, Part 3, a cyberpunkish chapter. So, where were we? If you want to know the whole backstory, it's in the first two parts. So for this chat, we're only going to talk about the bits we need for this chapter, the first chapter in the campaign. Our party of heroes are going to be contacted by Intron Corporation. They've had a break-in their offices, and they want the culprits found and the stolen material returned or destroyed. So far, so sensible. Now, if you're Intron, and you're pathologically secretive, defensive, and paranoid, how do you go about recruiting the team to help you out? Well, you send your head of security to find a group of likely people, and you don't much care where he finds them. So, Act 1. Recruited, briefed, and immersed. Scene 1 is an introduction if needed. In our campaign, we're going to leave the first scene's location largely up to the players. The way this campaign interfaces with either character generation or the previous parts of the story, if this isn't the first adventure in the campaign, is up to them. We could have the meeting take place in a bar. Maybe the heroes have got into a spot of bother with the Rozzers, and might be grateful to have the assistance of a friendly corporate type to get them out of trouble. Imagine, however, that this is going to be a one-shot or the first module in a campaign, or even that the party has been scattered and doing training or individual missions for a while. We should give the GM a sample location to get the party together. So, let's go for a traditional start. We're going to meet in a bar on a dark and stormy night. I'm not kidding. You can do it any way you choose, but I'm trying to show you how I build the ideas from a blank sheet of paper, and I've decided to go for the hackneyed and cliched and thoroughly unoriginal. You might want to do better. So, let's do a tavern on a dark and stormy night, but remember our theme. We're going to do it cyberpunkish. The Suchin Bar 9 is built into the corner of a dilapidated but functional building. Inside is some seating, but not much. Most of the patrons sit on benches made of repurposed crates, boxes and building materials that spread around both sides of the bar on the street. There's some cover in this space, provided by huge advertising hoardings that cover the streets. The underside showing adverts for cheap food and drink, and various gambling and other less reputable activities. Unseen by the patrons, the upper sides advertise vehicles, holiday destinations, ways to get out of the smoggy and unpleasant atmosphere of the city. Those adverts are visible from the rooftops around the bar, where the upper level, more expensive apartments are found, but they're also visible from passing air cars, where the wealthy skim across the city. At night, like now, the illuminated adverts provide all of the light for the street, bathing the environment in an ever-changing, headache-inducing blast of colours and shapes. It's a known haunt of petty criminals, and, for those willing to do some disreputable work, a place to find a contract to fulfil. Tonight, the steady rain beats down on the hoardings above, and the sound of water rushing down drains and falling off the ends of the hoardings is loud, but familiar. There's cheap food and cheap drink available. Nearby there are military personnel on leave, people getting out for a cheap night away from their crowded living spaces, and here and there, someone dealing drugs, selling illegal services or technology. Directly opposite the bench where our party can be found is a young and strung-out prostitute, desperately cramming down a meal before she starts her evening's work. She's already looking around for any potential business, casting an eye towards the party periodically. On the menu is rice soup, flavoured with something vaguely vegetable-based and brightly coloured to make it look more appetising. There's tea made from various weeds fortified with industrial ethanol, or alternatively, something like beer, but actually a carbonated drink with artificial flavourings alongside the alcohol. The party is together, partly for company, partly for safety, mainly because there's hope that if a job comes in, they can work it together and split the profit. They bring mixed skills, so any job can be accomplished, and they've worked together often enough that there's reasonable trust between them. Okay, that's our introduction. That is literally an introduction that the GM can use. It's an introduction that could be read to the players. We meet in a tavern on a dark and stormy night. It's our first location in theory, but it's completely replaceable, as it should be in case it doesn't fit the style you want or the past story of the party. So what do we need to get out of this location? In traveller terms, we need to get to meet our patron. But in any RPG setting, it's still the instigating event as far as the party's concerned. It's an opportunity to get some role-playing done, to introduce a character, to begin getting the pace, the style, the tone of the adventure right. So, next, we introduce our first important NPC. There are all sorts of ways to do this. The initial contact could be by electronic means, or even found on a notice board for that matter. However, here we need some sense of urgency. Intron is up against the clock. So back to our story. A man walks calmly into the middle of the haphazard crowd of people littered around the bar. He's looking for someone or something. He spots a group of people he wants to talk to and steps over to them, but almost immediately leaves, unsatisfied. His gaze then falls upon the party and he strides over. He's tall, with reddish hair and defined muscles under a dark jacket and trousers. He wears combat boots and looks fit, strong, well fed. He arrives at the party, glances around, leans in slightly. "You looking for work?" "I've got a job that might pay well, for the right sort of people." Great. Now, during the ensuing conversation, there are several things that the GM needs to know. Facts about this man that will allow the GM to portray him correctly and play his role accurately. There are also things that the GM has to consider if replacing the dark and stormy night meet in a cheap bar introduction with an alternative. So, this is what we need to know before we actually play the character as the GM. This NPC's name is Jack Gunn. 2 N's. He's a senior security person with Intron Corporation. He's looking for a team of competent people to do some work, quietly. He'll pay well, in fact very well, but the amount will depend on the skills the party can bring. He might have to hire other people as well, so the payment would be split in that case. He has a military past, but it will not have intersected with any military past the PCs might have. He's completely loyal to Intron, utterly incorruptible, capable of violence when required, and has no sense of humour or light-heartedness. He wants to get the party to a place where they can meet his boss, Mallory Court. That meeting will be at an Intron office for reasons that will become very clear. His vehicle is large enough for the party and is unmarked. It's on a nearby rooftop, parked and ready to go. So, that's our first location and meeting done. So the next thing we need is to find a way to get to the Intron office. It's nearby. In fact, for fairly obvious reasons, Gunn went to the closest place he could realistically find a crew. He's got a vehicle parked on a nearby rooftop, and he'll take the party to Mallory Court in a matter of minutes. So, do you want to describe the route to the transport in the module, or leave it up to the GM? For me, leave it up to the GM. Some players might want to know all the details of the walk to the transport, others might be happy with just knowing that they go to the transport and are flown to Intron. If it's likely the scene might not have to be described, then don't describe it. GMs are used to filling in holes in the narrative. However, the transport itself might need describing, and such things will turn up in several times in this adventure, so that's worth doing using whatever rules apply in the game system you're playing. There's likely to be a suitable generic type vehicle written in the rules system in a cyberpunkish game. So, the next scene will be the Intron office. This isn't the main headquarters or anything. In fact, in my mind, this isn't even the city in which Intron's HQ would be located. This is a relatively small sales office, in a space, in a building, that's shared with other companies. Intron is, however, a big corporation, so their office occupies the top floor of the building, and therefore has a convenient rooftop landing space for the vehicle that's bringing the party. This is a space we do need to describe, partly because this operation is going to be under the radar somewhat, so the meeting will have some unusual elements. Scene 2. The local Intron office. The transport approaches a somewhat smarter building. In this area, there are no housing units of any kind. It's the business district. The gaudy hoardings that covered the streets outside the bar are missing here, as each company wants to control whatever advertising is around its building. Most of the buildings are still covered with advertising, but now the colours and logos relate to the portion of the building the art covers. Where a building is divided into floors rented by different companies, the effect is not unlike a cake of many layers, each one in a different corporate scheme. It becomes clear which building Gunn is aiming for. Fairly nondescript, but with the colours of the corporation wrapped around the top floor and covering the open flat roof. The rain is still heavy, so the logo is a bit indistinct in the shimmering water. The landing is uneventful, and as the hatch opens, Gunn walks out into the rain as if he simply doesn't notice it. Once the party has followed, he closes the hatch and leads the way to a door built into a small structure on one corner of the roof. He waves an ID at the lock and opens the door, letting the party into a space with a lift. The lift has only 4 buttons despite the number of floors in the building. Gunn hits the second button and waves his security card over the sensor, and moments later the lift door opens and the party finds themselves in the top floor lobby of Intron Corporation's office. The office is barely lit. Just the flicker of electronic notices and company information throws a dull light across the space. Directly in front, down a long gap in the open plan space, is one brightly lit office, the door wide open, a large desk visible, and sitting perched on the near side of the desk, dressed impeccably in a smart business suit, is a tall, slim woman with white hair and sculpted features, so defined that they must have been surgically sharpened. I'll stop the description here just for a moment. This is, it's scene setting. It's something the GM can read out to the players to let them know important information about the scenario. It's also important because it sets the same tone in the mind of the GM. Make sure everyone's on the same page, so to speak. There's nothing wrong with taking questions from players to fill in details about the game, obviously. But it's worth giving them enough so they'll know what the right questions might be. Nobody gets this right all the time. Nobody gets this right most of the time. Okay, practically nobody gets the balance perfect ever. Still, you should try. Back to the narrative. Gunn leads the party towards the well-lit office and its stone-faced occupant. As you approach, you can see this isn't a personal office at all, but a meeting room. The white-haired woman is expressionless as you enter. Then she walks around the table and sits down. My name is Mallory Court, and I'm a vice president with Intron Corporation. I've told everyone who works here to stay out of the building, for the time being. Intron has 2 floors of this building, this one, and the basement. Earlier this evening, the basement was breached by thieves, and some important proprietary information and technology was stolen. It is important that this not leave Intron control. We are hiring a small group to independently investigate the break-in, identify the criminals, and either return the material to Intron or confirm that it has been destroyed, with appropriate evidence, of course. As you might imagine, we cannot use our normal security in case they have been, let's say, compromised. You will report directly to me and to nobody else, even if they are Intron personnel. Mr. Gunn will be available to provide any support or corporate information you might need, but you must not share anything sensitive with him. At this point, Gunn tries to interject, but Court glares at him. If your team could be trusted, we wouldn't be here, Mr. Gunn. Turning back to the team. Speed and discretion are of the utmost importance. It is possible the criminals are not aware of the significance of the material in their possession yet. Okay, so now we're fully briefed. But is the GM briefed? No, the GM isn't briefed. This is all the stuff that Court is willing to share with the players. The GM needs another list of facts to help explain the location and the scenario. So, the 4 buttons in the lift are for the roof, the top floor offices, the ground floor lobby, and the basement laboratory. The lift, this lift, is used exclusively by Intron. Other lifts from the lobby go to other floors, but this one only covers Intron interests. Until the theft is investigated, the office suite will remain closed, used exclusively by Court. She doesn't generally work here. She's head office person, far too senior to have an office in a small regional Intron location. She is lying about several things. She in fact trusts Gunn completely and expects him to keep an eye on you. She won't use Intron security because they might be vulnerable to a weapon that could only harm them, and she's not telling you about that weapon. And she hasn't explained the clock yet, but will, if pushed, concede that there are only 3 days before a major technology trade show in this city, where Intron will be an important presence. The situation must really be resolved before this to avoid any uncomfortable questions at such a public event. Right, so now, depending on how well the players ask their questions, and maybe on the rolls they achieve with the dice, some of this information might end up in their hands before they even leave the office. In any event, their first port of call should be the crime scene, which is the basement. In reality, this is the only lead the party has at this point. If they don't think to examine the basement, then, well, they're not fully on side with the plot yet. But a little bit of prompting is appropriate. This is because we're dealing with the transition into the moment when the training wheels come off. Up to this point, the players have been passengers. They've been taken from one moment to the next. Suddenly they have to take over. Sometimes that's not an easy thing to realise. They may not appreciate that here's the time to go independent and take action. Once they've examined the crime scene and have a few things to look into, then they'll know for a fact that they're in charge. But at this moment, they may not have got that yet. So, help them over this little speed bump if they need the push. The Intron basement location can be reached with a touch of the lowest button on the private lift and, again, a swish of the security card. Gunn will take them. The lift doors. Back to the narrative. The lift doors lead into a claustrophobic corridor, lit only by emergency lighting. The lift is at the corner of the block, and the corridors stretch away in two directions down the adjacent sides of the square. Each, on the side facing the middle of the space, has a series of doors leading to rooms. All the doors are open, and seemingly more than just open, broken open. The corridor has debris scattered along it in both directions. Small pieces of broken door or frame, discarded gas bottles for cutting torches. The doors, their surrounds and their security panels have been burnt through. Enough description for the moment. At this point, we should go to a map, of course, and plot what information can be found in each lab and how easy it would be to track each piece down, and this discussion isn't about that. This is about the plot, so we're going to move on to the important information that's available here, which is going to be less than that, because a lot of the stuff you put on the map could be misdirection. With any luck, your players have spotted something of interest. Specifically, they've seen the rooftop entry, and it was undamaged. They may want to check out the lobby, in which case they'll find the same. The lift wasn't damaged either. In the laboratory, however, the doors to the actual labs had to be forced open. We've had at least 3 opportunities to spot that the security card must have been used, or a very sophisticated hacking job done. But if hacking was the answer, why not hack the lab doors as well? If they examine the debris on the floor, they will not find a security card conveniently lying around, discarded in haste. But the computer logs of the building will correctly identify that an employee called KD Ramirez was issued the card that allowed entry. If they don't think of this, there are a few other options to get them on the path without spoon-feeding them. They might want to investigate the lobby, remember? And this is shared by all the building's tenants, so the guard is not an Intron employee. He will check cameras and point out that he has no useful footage, but he'll also check the security card logs if needed. Gunn can do this as well, once back in the Intron office upstairs. So, for our purposes, and as far as we're concerned, for the purposes of the referee, the robbers came in via the roof, went straight to the labs, broke into the rooms, stole the Signogene, and got out the same way, avoiding the lobby security cameras altogether. The only other place where cameras were working was the lab corridors, and that footage might be more interesting, showing the thieves arriving at lab level, breaking into labs and escaping by lift. And Gunn can show them footage of this if they ask to see it upstairs. However, we have our first proper clue. KD Ramirez. Chapter complete. Critical information and characters introduced. Next time, we'll follow the clues towards that first critical decision gate. And the real meat of the plot getting underway.